Most of us use 5G every day without thinking twice. We text, we scroll, we stream and call, trusting that signal around us. But according to a growing conspiracy theory, that same signal is quietly causing headaches, fatigue, cancer, and other illnesses, while governments hide that data. So how did a technology made and designed to connect the world become accused of making it sick? Supporters believe that 5G exposes the public to dangerous radiation through wireless networks, antennas, and connected devices. The concern begins with the word radiation, which is associated with cancer and medical x-rays. One of their strongest pieces of evidence used by supporters is the International Agency for Research on Cancer's classification of radiofrequency electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic to humans. This classification is real, so it's understandable that some people interpret it as evidence that wireless technology may be dangerous. But do these points prove that 5G actually causes illness? In order to answer that, we need to examine what the evidence actually means, what type of radiation 5G uses, and whether two events happening after each other proves that one of them caused the other. First, not all radiation affects the body the same way. 5G uses radio frequency waves, which are a form of non-ionizing radiation. Unlike ionizing radiation, such as X-rays, radio frequency waves don't carry enough energy to remove electrons from the atoms to damage the DNA the same way. Health Canada states that no adverse health effects have been scientifically established below the limits set by Safety Code 6, including exposure from 5G equipment. This does not mean that people who reported their symptoms are faking it or are inventing it. Their symptoms may be real, but it doesn't just simply prove that 5G caused. Blaming 5G because symptoms appeared after its introduction demonstrates the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. It occurs when someone assumes that one event caused the other simply because it happened first. For example, if 5G was introduced in someone's area and they later develop a headache, they automatically blame 5G. However, the order of events alone does not prove a causal connection. Supporters also point to IARC's classification as proof that 5G is dangerous. Now, IARC is a very credible source because it's the World Health Organization's specialized cancer research, and experts review the available scientific evidence. However, the meaning of this classification is very misunderstood. IARC's categories identify whether something could potentially present a cancer hazard. It did not conclude that 5G causes cancer. Presenting only the words possibly carcinogenic is an example of cherry picking happens when someone selects evidence that supports their position while ignoring information that weakens it or goes against it. In this case, supporters may repeat the most alarming phrase from the classification but leave out that the evidence was limited, that the classification was not specific to 5G, and that it did not make the causation. Health Canada reports that thousands of studies have examined radio frequency and electromagnetic fields. It identifies tissue heating and nerve stimulation as established harmful effects at exposures level above Canadian limits. However, it reports no established health risks from the low levels people normally receive from cell phones, antennas, and 5G devices. Health Canada uses a weight of evidence approach, meaning that strong, well-consistent studies receive more importance than inconsistent studies. Now, supporters may argue that the continued public expansion of 5G itself is suspicious. They could question why governments would allow the technology to be continued and used, even if there's a possibility of harm. However, allowing a technology to be distributed does not mean that the health concerns are being ignored. In Canada, wireless devices and network must meet radio frequency exposure requirements. These standards are meant to keep public exposure below levels at which scientifically established harmful effects can. This does not prove that any technology has absolutely zero risk, since technology knowledge can continue developing. However, it shows that 5G is not simply being distributed without testing, regulation, or the government's oversight. The World Health Organization also states that no adverse health effect has been linked to wireless technology. It acknowledges that fewer studies have been focused on some newer frequencies used by 5G and supports continued research. This acknowledgement is important because it shows that the WHO is not claiming that every scientific question has been answered. The WHO is a credible source because it's an international public health organization that evaluates research from many countries rather than just one local study or individual opinion. So, if the wider evidence does not support the theory, why does it continue? One reason is confirmation bias. This occurs when people only accept information that supports what they already believe and ignore or dismiss any information that goes against it. In conspiracy theories, people begin with the suspicion that governments and technology companies are hiding something and then interpret every new detail as a support for their belief. Evidence that goes against their theory may even be treated as a cover-up or support to what they believe. As a result, the theory becomes almost impossible to argue because both supporting and opposing evidence are made to fit the same conclusion. Before sharing alarming claims, we should ask whether the source is credible, whether the evidence actually proves causation, and whether the full body of research supports the conclusion.